The solicitor's voice was a dry rustle of parchment, each word carefully placed, like stones on a path I didn't want to walk. I watched his thin lips move, the fluorescent lights of his sterile office glinting off his spectacles. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a splinter under my fingernail. Grandmother, estranged. Words that held no warmth, only the chill of obligation. My hands, usually steady when they held a brush, were clenched in my lap, gripped tight. The air in the room was thick with the smell of old paper and something faintly metallic like old coins. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since Leela, the doll. A knot tightened in my stomach, a familiar, unwelcome clench. I pushed it down. I was a successful artist now. My work hung in galleries, people admired it, bought it. I wasn't the scared child hiding under the bed anymore. This inheritance, this obligation, was just a formality, a final loose end to tie up. The estate is considerable, the solicitor continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Though the property itself, well, it's in a state of considerable disrepair. Decades of neglect, I'm afraid. Disrepair. I pictured the peeling paint, the overgrown gardens, the shadows that must have pooled in every corner for years. It sounded like a place that would hold on to things I'd spent a lifetime trying to forget. I forced a nod. I understand. My voice was rougher than I intended. He slid a heavy, ornate key across the polished desk. The keys to Blackwood Manor, Mr. Dean, and the deed. The drive out, there was a blur of nervous energy. The city faded, replaced by rolling hills that grew wilder, more untamed. The sky, a bruised gray, seemed to press down on the car. I kept my gaze fixed on the road, but my mind kept replaying fragments of memory. The chipped porcelain smile, the button eyes that seemed to follow me, the faint, sweet scent of decay that always clung to her. Leela. As the gates of Blackwood Manor loomed, a wave of nausea washed over me. They were wrought iron, twisted into grotesque shapes that resembled skeletal branches. The stone pillars flanking them were crumbling, choked with ivy. It was larger than I remembered, a hulking, gothic beast of a place, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from a weathered face. I parked the car on the gravel drive, the crunch of stones under the tires unnervingly loud. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The house loomed, impossibly tall, its gables sharp against the bruised sky. The massive oak front door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the stillness. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that penetrated the gloom of the grand foyer. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations from the chandelier, its crystal droplets dulled by years of neglect. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the musty odor of abandonment and something else. Something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a sealed room. I walked through the echoing halls, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the bare floorboards. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched me from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to hold a silent, disapproving gaze. It was as if the house itself exhaled a breath of frozen sorrow. My grandmother's belongings were still scattered about, untouched. A half-finished needlepoint lay on a velvet armchair, its threads faded. It felt like stepping into a tableau, a frozen moment in time, waiting for its audience. But I was the only one here, or so I told myself. Papers were piled high, covered in a thick layer of dust. It was here, tucked away in a drawer, that I found it. A small, leather-bound diary. My grandmother's handwriting, surprisingly neat, filled its pages. I flipped through it, my fingers brushing against brittle paper. Most of it was mundane, accounts of daily life, weather observations. Then a passage caught my eye. The child is too sensitive. He sees things, hears things. I told him to ignore it, the doll. It's just a toy. The word sent a shiver down my spine, a prickle of unease that spread across my skin. I was here to sort through her things, to put this old house and the memories it held behind me. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. I told myself it was just the house, the atmosphere. Old houses creak. They settle. They hold onto the past, a sense of something waiting. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, my breath catching in my throat. Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A rustling, like silk against wood. It came from upstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I told myself it was the wind, a loose shutter, but the air was still, utterly still. I walked towards the grand staircase, my hand gripping the banister, the wood slick with a fine layer of dust. The sound came again, clearer this time. A soft, rhythmic creak. It was coming from the end of the hall, from a room I hadn't yet dared to enter. The nursery. But who, or what, was here with me in this decaying monument to my family's past? The air inside Blackwood Manor was thick, cloying like the scent of old dust and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. It clung to the back of my throat. I'd expected decay, of course. The estate agent's photos had shown peeling wallpaper and cobwebs thick as shrouds, but the photographs hadn't captured the weight of this place. It pressed down on me, a physical burden, making each breath a conscious effort. My footsteps echoed on the bare floorboards of the foyer, each creak a sharp, sudden sound that seemed to startle the very silence. Sunlight, what little managed to penetrate the grimy, leaded glass of the fanlight above the door, cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just the light, just the age of the house. I walked deeper, my hand trailing along the dusty banister of the grand staircase. This was my grandmother's house. My estranged grandmother, who I'd barely known, whose letters had been terse and infrequent until the solicitor's call. I was here to clear it out, to sell it, to sever the last, tenuous tie to a family history I'd spent my adult life trying to outrun. The drawing room was a museum of forgotten things. Furniture draped in faded sheets stood like ghostly sentinels. I pulled back a sheet from a wingback chair, revealing cracked leather that smelled of mildew and mothballs. On a side table, a collection of porcelain figurines, their painted smiles unnervingly fixed, stared out with glassy eyes. I felt a familiar prickle of unease, a tightening in my chest, the same sensation I'd had as a child when I'd felt watched. I moved from room to room, each one a tableau of neglect. The dining room table was set with dusty china, as if awaiting guests who had never arrived. A child's rocking horse, its painted eyes chipped and faded, stood frozen mid-rock in a corner of what must have been a nursery. I felt a phantom touch on my arm, a fleeting, icy caress. I spun around, nothing, just the dust motes dancing in the shafts of weak light. My grandmother's study was the most disturbing. Books were piled precariously on every surface, their spines cracked and brittle. Papers were scattered everywhere, a chaotic testament to a mind perhaps as fractured as the house itself. I found her diary, the one I'd closed earlier, on her desk. Its worn leather cover felt strangely warm beneath my fingertips. I resisted the urge to open it again. I couldn't afford to let that unravel me now. I needed to be methodical, practical. I needed to get this done. I opened a heavy oak wardrobe, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the musty smell intensified. I started pulling out clothes, folding them neatly, or at least trying to. A heavy wool coat, a faded floral dress. Then at the very back, nestled amongst a pile of old blankets, I found it. A wooden box, unremarkable, plain, with a tarnished brass clasp. My fingers trembled as I reached for the clasp. It was stiff, resistant, as if reluctant to yield its contents. With a final, sharp click, it sprang open. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was Leela. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face unnervingly smooth, her painted blue eyes wide and staring. Her once bright calico dress was faded, stained, and a single button hung precariously from a thread. The same unnervingly serene smile was fixed on her lips. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of lavender and something acrid like burnt sugar wafted from the box. I slammed the lid shut, the sound echoing through the silent house. My breath hitched in my throat. How could she be here? I'd seen her. I'd seen her gone. I'd been so sure I needed to get out of this room, out of this house. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the wardrobe, on the box I'd just closed. My foot bumped against something on the floor. I looked down. A small, intricately carved wooden doll. It was crudely made, its limbs misshapen, its painted eyes wide and vacant. It looked nothing like Leela, yet it felt connected. I turned towards the hallway, needing to find the main stairs, needing to get back to the outside world, to solid ground. But the hallway seemed longer than it had before. The house seemed to exhale a slow, drawn-out sigh that rustled the tattered curtains. Then I heard it, faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. A child's giggle. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My skin prickled, and the fine hairs on my arms stood on end. I stood frozen, straining my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Was it real, or was it just the house playing tricks on my frayed nerves? I turned back towards the study, drawn by an invisible, terrifying force. I knew with a certainty that made my stomach clench that I couldn't leave Leela there. Not again. But where could I possibly put her? I took a tentative step back into the study, my eyes darting around the room, searching for what? I didn't know. Then my gaze fell upon a section of the wall near the back of the room. The wallpaper there was stained, discolored, almost as if it had been recently disturbed. There was a faint line, barely visible, suggesting a hidden door. A door that wasn't on any of the house plans I'd seen. A door leading to what? I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough texture of the aged wallpaper. The giggle echoed again, closer this time, seeming to emanate from the very wall itself. A tremor ran through my hand as I pushed against the hidden panel. It carried with it a faint, unsettling odor like damp earth and something else. Something metallic. This had to be it. This had to be where she belonged. I stepped through the opening into the Stygian blackness. I was in a place that wasn't supposed to exist. A place the house had kept hidden. The metallic tang in the air was stronger here, deeper in the house. It was a smell that prickled the hairs on my arms, a low hum of wrongness that vibrated through the floorboards. I moved through the cavernous rooms, my footsteps echoing like accusations in the stillness. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that dared to penetrate the grimy windows, each one a tiny specter in the suffocating gloom. My grandmother. She'd always been a phantom, a whispered name in my childhood, and now her house felt like her tomb. I was looking for anything, a reason why she'd left this place to me. A resentment that had festered for years, a bitterness I'd tried to outrun, had somehow led me back to this monument of neglect. The furniture was draped in white sheets, like pale, hunched figures waiting in the shadows. I pulled one back, revealing a mahogany desk, its surface scarred and stained. The wood felt cool and slick under my fingertips, almost unnervingly so. My grandmother's journals were there, stacked neatly, bound in faded leather. Her elegant, spidery script filled the pages, a testament to a life I'd never known. I flipped through them, my heart a dull, heavy thud against my ribs. Then a passage dated years ago made my breath catch. She watches, always watches. She. The pronoun hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the cramped script, a growing unease tightening its grip. The pact is fragile, it must be maintained, it fluttered, settling near a heavy, ornate rug. A faint, almost imperceptible movement caught my eye within its depths. I froze, my senses on high alert. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, thick and sickening. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out, my fingers brushing against something rough and dry. It felt like brittle fabric and then something smooth, cool, and unyielding. Porcelain. My blood felt like ice water in my veins. I recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. This was impossible. This was a nightmare I'd buried so deep, I'd convinced myself it was just a fabrication of a frightened child's mind. With a surge of desperate resolve, I pushed aside the desk, scraping it noisily across the wooden floor. And there, nestled amongst a pile of moth-eaten blankets, was her. Leela. He was smaller than I remembered, her painted smile a grotesque rictus, her glass eyes, once a startling blue, now dulled and clouded, staring with an unnerving vacancy. Her dress, once a pristine white lace, was now stained and frayed, clinging to her porcelain limbs like a second skin. The air around her crackled with a palpable malevolence, a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. A wave of nausea washed over me. The metallic tang in the air intensified, and I realized with sickening certainty that it wasn't just a smell. It was a taste. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling a whimper. The doll's vacant gaze seemed to pierce through me, not seeing, but knowing. It was the same look I remembered, the one that had haunted my sleep for decades. The same look that had made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. This couldn't be real. He was just a doll, a relic of a forgotten past. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. The child sees it too, the emptiness behind the glass eyes. I stumbled backward, my legs weak, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The floor beneath me felt unsteady, as if the very foundation of the house was shifting. I needed to get out. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the doll, on the malevolent stillness that emanated from her. What had my grandmother done to keep her here, and why had she left her for me? The air in the room grew heavy, pressing in on me. The faint scent of decay was now mingled with something else, something cloying and sweet like overripe flowers. What else was hidden in this house, lurking just beyond my sight? The air in the hallway grew heavy, thick with a scent I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual must of old wood and dust. This was something else, a cloying sweetness with an undertone of decay, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I took a tentative step, then another, my bare feet slapping softly against the warped floorboards. The doll was gone from the landing, vanished. My muscles screamed with the urge to run, to bolt out of this house and never look back, but a morbid curiosity, a sick fascination held me captive. I remembered Grandma Alara's hushed warnings, her eyes wide and darting whenever Leela's name even brushed her lips. She watches, she'd whisper, her voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. She waits. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman, her mind frayed by time and solitude. Now the words echoed in the oppressive silence, taking on a chilling weight. My gaze swept the landing, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of porcelain eyes. Nothing. I edged closer to the staircase, my hand reaching out to grip the splintered banister. The wood felt strangely slick under my fingertips, as if coated in a thin film of something. I pulled my hand back, a prickle of unease crawling up my arm. A sound, faint at first, then growing. A child's laughter, high-pitched, innocent, yet laced with an unnerving dissonance that scraped against my nerves. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the peeling wallpaper and the stained ceiling. My heart began to thud, a heavy, insistent drumbeat against my ribs. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. There were no children in this house. There hadn't been for decades. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source, but the laughter twisted and shifted, morphing into a soft, melodic humming. It was a lullaby, a tune I vaguely recognized from my own childhood, one my mother used to sing. But this version was warped, sung in a voice that was too breathy, too young, too wrong. My eyes landed on the doorway leading to the master bedroom, the one Grandma Alara had kept locked for years. A sliver of light, impossibly bright, bled from beneath the door. It wasn't the weak, diffused light of the afternoon sun. This light pulsed, a warm, inviting glow that belied the suffocating atmosphere of the house. And the humming grew louder, more insistent, drawing me in. Against my better judgment, I moved towards it. Each step was a deliberate act of defiance against my own rising panic. The air grew warmer as I approached, the sweet, decaying scent intensifying. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the tarnished brass knob. As my fingers closed around it, the humming ceased abruptly. Light beneath the door winked out. Silence descended, thick and absolute, more terrifying than any sound. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. Was this a trap, a test? Then a faint scratching sound from behind the door, like tiny fingernails dragging across wood. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the aged oak. The scratching continued, a rhythm of pure malice, so close I could feel a phantom breath on my skin. Dean! I recoiled, spinning around, my arms flailing. The hallway was empty, utterly terrifyingly empty. My breath hitched. My vision swam. Was I imagining things? Was the stress finally cracking me? No, the doll, Leela, she wasn't just a toy. He was something more, something that fed on fear. My gaze fell on the floorboards near the master bedroom door. It looked like ink. As I watched, mesmerized and horrified, the stain began to spread, forming a crude, childlike drawing of a face. A face with vacant, staring eyes and a wide, unnerving smile. My knees buckled. I stumbled backward, my legs weak, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the spreading stain, on the malevolent grin etched into the wood. A faint clicking sound, from the room behind the door, like tiny porcelain joints moving. Then a new scent, sharp and metallic, began to mingle with the cloying sweetness, a scent that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was the smell of something wet. I needed to know what was in that room, but what if I opened the door and saw something I could never unsee? What if the scratching wasn't just scratching? What if it was Leela trying to get out, or trying to get in? What if this entire section of the house, the one that wasn't supposed to exist, was her creation? The basement level officially doesn't exist. It was a place I had only glimpsed in nightmares, a place that now felt terrifyingly real. I looked back at the door. The ink stain had stopped spreading, but the drawn face seemed to watch me, its smile widening infinitesimally. The metallic scent grew stronger, and the clicking sound from behind the door. It was closer now, right on the other side of the wood. Did I dare look? The emptiness of the hallway was a lie, I knew it. Leela's silence wasn't a lack of presence, but a taut, coiled waiting. It felt like the air itself had turned to thick, damp wool, muffling sound, pressing in. I backed away, my hands outstretched, searching for something solid, something real to anchor myself. My fingers brushed against peeling floral wallpaper, the dampness seeping through to my skin. It smelled of mildew and something else, something cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. A smell I remembered from the attic, from her room. I found myself in my studio. The abandoned factory floor, salvaged and repurposed, felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could impose order on the chaos that was consuming me. Or so I'd told myself. Now the vast space, usually a haven, felt cavernous and cold. The bare bulbs overhead cast long, distorted shadows that danced with every tremor of my hands. My canvases, leaning against the brick walls, seemed to stare back, accusing. But the memory wasn't just in my head. It was in the house. It was in her. Leela. The name itself felt like a shard of ice on my tongue. I needed to paint. I grabbed a large canvas, the rough texture of the linen abrasive against my fingertips. I squeezed tubes of paint, the thick, viscous colors a stark contrast to the muted palette I'd been using. Black, deep, suffocating black, red, the color of a fresh wound, and a sickly, pale yellow, the color of jaundice. My brush moved with a frantic energy, an urgency I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't thinking, not really. My hands were guided by something else, something ancient and furious that clawed its way from the depths of my being. Figures began to emerge on the canvas, contorted and skeletal, faces with gaping mouths, frozen in silent screams, limbs twisted at impossible angles, and in the center a small porcelain figure. Her painted eyes, usually so vacant, seemed to gleam with a malevolent intelligence. Her chipped smile widened, a grotesque rictus. The smell of turpentine filled the air, sharp and acrid, but it couldn't mask the underlying scent of decay that clung to me to this house. I shivered but didn't stop. The strokes became more violent, the paint smeared and scraped with the palette knife, creating a visceral texture that felt almost alive. The figures writhed, their forms blurring into a nightmare landscape. A low hum began to emanate from somewhere beneath the floorboards. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling. This was a deeper, more resonant sound, a vibration that pulsed through the concrete and into my teeth. It reminded me of the old generator in the abandoned factory, a sound that promised power and danger. The humming intensified, the floor beneath me vibrating more noticeably. I paused, my brush dripping crimson onto the canvas. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I listened. The sound was coming from below, from the place that wasn't supposed to be there. I'd avoided it, of course. The door hidden behind a false wall in the old pantry had remained locked, the key lost to time. But the humming, it was a siren call, a promise of answers, or perhaps a deeper descent. My fingers trembled as I reached for the palette knife, the rough edge digging into my palm. My gaze flickered back to the painting. Leela's painted eyes seemed to follow me, her smile widening in the flickering light. She knew I was listening. She knew I was afraid. The humming grew louder, a guttural thrumming that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. I felt a strange compulsion, a morbid curiosity that warred with the primal instinct to flee. What was down there? What was waiting for me in the unacknowledged depths of this decaying mansion? My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked at the painting, at Leela's mocking gaze, and then back at the pantry door. Was this what she wanted? For me to finally go down? The hallway stretched, an impossible corridor of fading wallpaper and dust motes dancing in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. My fingers brushed against rough plaster, then a yielding, damp texture that made my stomach clench. It wasn't plaster. It was a tapestry, thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something coppery and stale. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. The silence pressed in, a physical weight on my chest. Back to the light, back to the familiar decay of the upper floors. But my feet felt rooted, heavy as lead. The air grew colder, a biting chill that seeped through my sweater, raising gooseflesh on my arms. This house. It was more than just old and neglected. It was wrong. It breathed a slow, malignant breath, and I was trapped within its lungs. A faint scraping sound echoed from the floor above. Not the settling groans of an old house, but a deliberate, dragging noise. Nothing. Leela, he was here. I could feel her watching, her unseen gaze a prickle on my skin. I turned back to the hallway, my heart thrumming a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs, the tapestry. I looked closer, my eyes adjusting to the dimness. It depicted a scene, a pastoral landscape rendered in faded threads. But something was off. The figures in the foreground, small and indistinct, seemed to be moving, a trick of the light, surely, a hallucination born of fear. Then a distinct click from behind me. I froze, every muscle tensing. The sound was small, precise, like a latch being thrown. I hadn't heard any doors open or close. I hadn't moved. My breath hitched. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to turn. The hallway was still there, the tapestry still hanging. But now a section of the wall, previously seamless, was ajar. A sliver of absolute blackness peeked through. A draft carrying the smell of damp earth and something acrid like old chemicals snaked out. My grandmother. She rarely spoke of the past, of my parents, or of the doll. But he had always been there, a silent observer, her porcelain eyes fixed on me. The opening widened. The scraping sound from above intensified, closer now, directly overhead. It wasn't water. It was thick, sticky, and carried that faint, metallic tang. My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on something. I fell, my hands landing on the rough, splintered wood, the opening in the wall. It wasn't a door. It was a gap, a tear in the fabric of the house. And from it, a low hum began to emanate, a vibration that resonated in my bones. My gaze fell to the floor where I had landed. Beneath the dust and grime, a series of carvings etched into the wood. Symbols. I recognized some of them. Fragments from my grandmother's old grimoires, the ones she'd kept locked away. But these were different, twisted, imbued with a sinister energy. The hum grew louder, a discordant thrum that vibrated through the floor, up my legs, into my very teeth. The air grew thick, heavy, making it difficult to breathe. My vision swam. My grandmother's voice, thin and reedy, echoed in my mind. She needs to be fed. Fed? What did she mean? I scrambled to my feet, my eyes fixed on the widening blackness. The scraping sound above stopped. A heavy thud. So faint I almost missed it, yet it cut through the hum like a shard of ice. Dean. It was Leela's voice, or it had been. Now it was something else, something ancient, something broken, something filled with a bottomless malice. It came from the opening. My grandmother had known. He had known all along. He had kept Leela here in this house, in this hidden place, but why? And what had she done to keep her? Contained? The opening in the wall was no longer a sliver, it was a gaping maw. The hum intensified, a physical force that threatened to tear me apart, and then I saw it. Within the absolute blackness, a single glinting eye, tiny porcelain, watching me. What was my grandmother truly protecting me from, or was she protecting it from the world? The air in the secret room was thick, cloying. It smelled of dust and something else, something metallic and sweet like old pennies left in stagnant water. My breath hitched. Leela's voice, or what had been Leela's voice, echoed from the opening. It was a whisper now, a dry rustle of leaves against stone, but it carried the weight of ages. He had known, and he had kept it here, in this place that wasn't supposed to be. My hands trembled as I reached for the rough-hewn wood of the hidden door, the one I'd pried open to find this chamber. The stone felt unnervingly warm under my fingertips, a heat that had no business emanating from beneath the earth. Now, before whatever had spoken decided to speak again, I scrambled back, my boots skidding on the gritty floor of the main basement. The stairs leading up to the kitchen seemed impossibly far. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure instinct screaming, "Run!" I didn't dare look back at the gaping maw of the hidden room. I just ran. My feet pounded on the concrete, the sound amplified in the cavernous space. The familiar chill of the basement, usually a comforting presence after the oppressive heat of the hidden chamber, now felt like a shroud. The stacks of forgotten crates, the rusted tools hanging on the walls, they all felt watchful. I reached the bottom of the main staircase, my lungs burning. I grasped the rough wood of the banister, ready to ascend. But as I pulled myself up, a sound stopped me, a soft, rhythmic scraping. It came from directly above me, from the kitchen. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It wasn't the sound of furniture being moved, it was too deliberate, too playful, like a child dragging a toy across a wooden floor. My blood, which had been a frantic torrent, now slowed to a thick, viscous crawl. Leela. I hesitated. Should I confront it, or should I try to slip out the back door? But the back door was on the other side of the house, past the main hall, past the drawing room where I'd last seen her, or rather, where I'd seen the effect of her. The scraping stopped. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Then a single, clear note, like a child's music box, tinkled from the kitchen. It was a melody I remembered, a lullaby my grandmother used to hum, a lullaby that always made my skin prickle with unease. I took a tentative step onto the first stair. The wood groaned under my weight. The music box note stopped abruptly. Another sound replaced it, a soft thud, as if something small and heavy had fallen. My eyes darted to the doorway at the top of the stairs. Nothing, just the dim light filtering in from the hallway, but I knew he was there, watching, waiting. I forced myself to climb. 10, 11, 12. My hand reached the landing. The air here was different. Stale, yes, but with a faint, sickly sweetness that hadn't been there before. The smell from the secret room. It was seeping up. I peered into the hallway. The light was dimmer than it should have been. The ornate wallpaper, usually a deep crimson, now seemed muted, almost brown. The grandfather clock at the end of the hall, its pendulum, usually a steady swing, was still. Dead. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a physical pressure against my skin. My palms began to sweat. I wiped them on my trousers, the rough fabric doing little to absorb the dampness. This house was a cage, and Leela was the warden. I moved down the hallway, my footsteps unnervingly loud. I passed the drawing room. The door was slightly ajar. I could see a sliver of the room within. A single chair sat in the center, draped with a white sheet. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. Then, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I snapped my head around. I reached the front door. My hand fumbled for the lock. It felt slick, as if coated in oil. I pulled. It wouldn't budge. It was as if the door had fused itself to the frame. I threw my shoulder against it. The heavy oak shuddered, but held firm. A faint giggle drifted from the drawing room. It was Leela's laugh, but twisted. Wrong. I backed away from the door, my eyes fixed on the drawing room. The sheet on the chair began to stir, to rise, as if an invisible occupant were shifting beneath it. My breath plumed in front of me. I was trapped. The house, my inheritance, had become my prison, and the jailer was a doll I had buried years ago, a doll I had hoped to forget. But he had never forgotten me. The sheet rose higher, revealing the vague outline of something beneath it. Something that was not a chair. What was forming under that sheet? And how could I possibly escape a house that refused to let me go? The sound stopped. The silence that followed was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I pressed my ear to the cold, damp wood of the hallway door, straining to hear anything. The house creaked and groaned around me, a symphony of decay that usually went unnoticed. Leela, I knew it was her. That childish, dragging sound, so innocent on its own, had been laced with something profoundly wrong. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The door didn't swing open. It was locked. Of course it was locked. Leela wouldn't make it that easy. I pushed against the wood, a futile effort against a reinforced barrier. This was it. The game was over. I couldn't run, not from this, not anymore. The memory of my grandmother's warnings, dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman, flooded my mind. He feeds on your fear, Dean. Don't give her what she wants. I had given her everything. My lungs burned with the stale, musty air of the mansion. I had to be smart. I had to use what I'd learned. The doll wasn't just an object. It was a focal point, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent. It fed on my memories, on my despair. I backed away from the door, my eyes scanning the hallway. The faded wallpaper, depicting a pastoral scene now peeling and stained, seemed to writhe in the dim light filtering through the grimy window. A soft thud echoed from behind the locked door, then another. It sounded like something small and heavy being dropped. I imagined Leela, her porcelain skin cracked and yellowed, her button eyes glinting with malicious glee. He was playing with me, toying with my sanity. I had to get to the basement. My grandmother had mentioned it, a place she'd hidden things, a place she'd feared. A place where Leela's influence might be contained or perhaps amplified. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only option I had left. I turned and ran, not towards the front door, but towards the kitchen. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, each step a betrayal. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Pots and pans lay scattered, remnants of a meal I hadn't cooked, or perhaps a struggle I couldn't recall. The air here was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic like old pennies. My eyes darted to the pantry. My grandmother had always kept it locked. I'd seen her struggle with the key once, her hands shaking. I remembered the ornate, wrought-iron grate set into the floor just inside the pantry door. She'd said it led to? Somewhere, a place that wasn't supposed to be there. The basement level officially doesn't exist. I flung open the pantry door. The metallic smell was stronger here, almost overpowering. I stumbled inside, my hands reaching out, searching for the grate. It was heavier than I expected, solid and unyielding. A faint scratching sound emanated from beneath the grate, like tiny claws scrabbling at stone. My breath hitched. He was down there, waiting. I knelt, my knees protesting against the dusty floor. The grate was secured by a rusted latch. It was stiff, resisting my efforts. I pulled harder, my muscles straining. The scratching intensified, growing frantic. It was no longer the sound of a doll. It was something alive. With a final, desperate heave, the latch sprang free. A blast of frigid air, carrying the stench of damp earth and decay, rose to meet me. It was a smell that clawed at the back of my throat, a scent of things long buried, things that should have stayed buried. The scratching stopped. It was a sound that promised pain, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger. I peered into the blackness, my eyes struggling to adjust. Shapes began to coalesce, indistinct at first, then sharpening into something I couldn't comprehend. A pair of tiny, gleaming points that might have been eyes. They were ancient, guttural, and filled with a terrible, predatory glee. I hesitated, my hand still on the heavy grate. The air was thick with anticipation. Something waited for me down there, something that had been Leela's master, or perhaps Leela herself in a form I couldn't yet grasp. Was this the heart of her power, or just another trap? The air in the basement level officially doesn't exist was thick, a cloying miasma of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. My flashlight beam, a trembling finger of light, swept across walls that wept condensation, slick with a grime that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly erase. The silence here wasn't empty. It was pregnant with a waiting, a coiled tension that pressed against my eardrums. Each drip from the unseen ceiling was a hammer blow against my nerves. I'd followed the chill, the impossible draft that snaked its way up from the hidden depths of the house, a phantom breath on my skin. Dean. I had to do this for Dean, the boy I once was, the one who'd cowered in the attic, convinced the doll was breathing him in. My boot crunched on something brittle. I aimed the light down. Bone fragments, small and bleached, scattered like forgotten confetti. A tremor ran through me, a primal recoil. It was too much, too real. The scent intensified, a sweet decay that made my gorge rise. Leela. I knew he was here. I forced myself deeper, my breath catching in my throat with every shallow inhale. The beam landed on a small, crudely fashioned wooden chest, half buried in the packed earth floor. It looked too recent to be part of the house's original decay, yet impossibly old. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with the rusted latch. It groaned, a wounded animal's cry, and then sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of brittle, yellowed lace, was Leela. Not the doll I remembered, the one with the chipped porcelain smile and vacant glass eyes. This Leela was changed. Her fabric was stained a deep, bruised purple, the kind of color that bled from old wounds. Her button eyes, no longer innocent, gleamed with a malevolent intelligence, reflecting the meager light of my flashlight like twin chips of obsidian. And around her, woven into the lace, were strands of what looked disturbingly like hair. My hair. This wasn't just a doll. It was a vessel, a focal point, and it had been feeding on me. The memories, sharp and jagged, began to surface not as fleeting images but as visceral sensations. The way her head would tilt just so when no one was looking. I reached out, my fingers trembling, intending to snatch her, to banish her, to do anything to break the insidious hold she'd maintained for decades. But as my hand neared, the air around the chest shimmered, a heatless distortion. Leela's head slowly, impossibly turned. Her painted lips, a slash of faded red, seemed to stretch into a knowing smirk. A low hum began to emanate from the doll, a sound that vibrated not in my ears but in my very bones. It grew, a discordant thrumming that made the damp walls tremble. The strands of hair, those horrifying strands, began to writhe, to twitch as if possessed by a life of their own. They snaked out of the chest, reaching, grasping. Panic, raw and unreasoning, seized me. The hum intensified, a deafening cacophony that seemed to be tearing at reality itself. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. I could feel it, the ancient hunger, the insatiable need that had festered in this forgotten place. You can't leave, you're mine, you always were. My fingers brushed against something metallic, a shovel. Without thinking, I seized it, its weight a solid, reassuring thing in my trembling hands. The hum reached a crescendo, a piercing shriek that was both sound and sensation. I swung, a wild, desperate arc, the metal blade connecting with something soft, yielding, and then a sickening crunch. The hum cut off abruptly. The infernal glow winked out. The air still smelled of decay, but now it was tinged with something fresh, something that made my stomach churn. I hesitated, my entire being screaming at me to flee, to never look back. But the artist in me, the part that craved understanding, that sought to dissect and define, compelled me forward. I picked up the flashlight, my hand shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. I turned the beam back to the chest. The doll was still there, but no longer glowing, no longer humming. Her painted eyes stared blankly ahead. The strands of hair were limp, inert. It was my blood. I had done it. I had faced the source of the torment, the embodiment of my childhood fears, and what? I had struck it. I had spilled its blood, had I destroyed it.